The folder was already open on the conference table when I walked in. My name on the tab. My brother's handwriting on the sticky note on top. For the good of the family. My father sat at the head of the table. My mother held a tissue she hadn't used yet. My brother had his phone face down near his elbow. The small red light on the side glowing. Recording. I had driven 40 minutes to get here. I had a casserole dish in my car for my mother because it was a Sunday and I still did things like that. I had no idea I was walking into a proceeding. What was in that folder and what I had brought in my own bag, I'll get there. But first, let me tell you who I was before that Sunday afternoon changed the math on everything. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story reaches you somewhere real. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I genuinely love knowing who's out there listening. My name is Claire. I'm 34 years old. I'm a registered nurse at a mid-size hospital in Denton, Texas, and I have been since I was 26. I work the telemetry floor, which means I spend 12 hours watching hearts, rhythms on a screen, blips and spikes, and the occasional flatline that requires a different kind of calm than most people have to practice. I am good at my job because I was trained early to read a room before anyone in it spoke. My daughter Emma is 8. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness, which is either the best or worst combination, depending on the day. She is currently obsessed with marine biology, so our apartment in Denton is decorated with laminated pictures of whale sharks and a poster of the food chain that she made me tape above the kitchen table so she can study it while she eats breakfast. She narrates things. She'll watch a pigeon on the windowsill and provide a full documentary voiceover. She keeps me laughing when I forget to. Emma's father, Ryan, was a decent man who left when she was 3. Not cruel. Not dramatic. Just someone who discovered at 29 that the version of himself he wanted to be did not include the version of his life we had built together. We share custody. He has her every other weekend. He lives in Fort Worth now with a woman named Dana, who teaches spin class and is, from what Emma tells me, very nice. I hold no anger about any of that. Some things just finish. What I hold, and have held for 4 years, is a spreadsheet. I didn't start keeping it intentionally. It began as a note in my phone. A number here. A transfer there. Then it grew into something I opened and updated the way some people update their grocery list. By the time I sat down at that conference table, that note had become 22 pages of documented transactions, dates, amounts, the exact text messages that accompanied each request. 4 years of careful record. I didn't know why I kept it so precisely. Nurses document everything. It is reflexive. It is trained. Turns out, it was also protection I didn't know I was building. Let me tell you about the Calloway family. My parents, Robert and Patricia, live in the same house in Garland, Texas, where my brother and I grew up. 4 bedrooms, a yard that my father used to mow in a very specific diagonal pattern and now mostly ignores. A kitchen where my mother made pot roast every Sunday until about 2 years ago when Sundays became something different. My brother Daniel is 31. He is 3 years younger than me and has always moved through the world as though someone installed a sensor in him that detects favorable wind and orients him toward it automatically. He is charming in the specific way of people who have never been told no, in a way that stuck. He played baseball in high school, which in a Texas town of our size was equivalent to being minor royalty. He never finished his degree at UT Arlington, left after 2 years, came back to Garland, picked up work that was always described in vague terms, consulting, freelance, something with logistics, and spent most of his adult life living in my parents' house, which was described as temporary and then reclassified without discussion into permanent. Growing up, there was a shelf in the living room. Trophies, ribbons, photographs, Daniel's varsity letter, framed, Daniel's senior photo, 8 by 10, center position, Daniel at prom, Daniel at regional championships, Daniel grinning in the stands at his own party. My nursing school graduation photo sat on the piano, small frame, no mat, slightly crooked because my father hung it in 40 seconds and no one adjusted it. I don't say this for pity. I say it because understanding that shelf is necessary for understanding everything that came after. 4 years ago, my father had a cardiac event, not a full heart attack, what we call a warning, He was 57. He was working a job he hated at a supply company in Mesquite, carrying 30 extra pounds, sleeping badly, eating worse. The doctors put him on 3 medications and told him to reduce stress. He took the medications, reduced none of the stress, and 2 months later, the supply company downsized, and he was gone. I was the one he called. Not because Daniel couldn't handle it, but because I was the one who would know what to do. He asked me not to tell Daniel right away. He said, "I don't want your brother worried." I said, "Dad, he lives with you." My father said, "Claire, please." So I kept it. My mother called me 3 weeks later. Her voice was the voice she used when she needed something and had been working up to asking for an hour before she dialed. She said, "Your father won't look for work." She said, "We're behind on the property taxes." She said, "I don't know what to do." I was sitting in the hospital parking lot after a 12-hour shift. My scrubs smelled like antiseptic and the particular exhaustion of a floor where 3 patients had coded in 1 week. Emma was at the sitters. I had 20 minutes before I had to pick her up. "How much?" I asked. $2,200 would catch us up, she said. "Just this month. Nurses do not make what people think we make. But I had a second job on weekends doing home health visits. I had almost no personal spending. I could move things around. Just this month became every month. The amount shifted. Sometimes $1,100, sometimes $1,800 when the AC unit failed or when my father's prescriptions changed. Once, $2,400 in a single transfer when the water heater went and Daniel, who was living in the house rent-free, had decided that same week to spend 3 days in San Antonio at a concert festival he posted about extensively on Facebook. I saw those posts from the parking garage at the hospital at 6 in the morning. I screenshotted them without knowing why. I just did. That was the beginning of the folder. For 4 years, I sent money. I skipped my own dentist appointments. I drove a car with a slow oil leak because the repair estimate was $400. I kept rerouting. Emma did not have the birthday party she wanted when she turned 7 because the venue deposit was $250, and that particular month I had covered my parents' car insurance because my father had let it lapse. I told Emma we'd do something special, just the 2 of us instead. We made homemade pizza and watched a movie, and she said it was the best birthday ever, and I sat in the kitchen after she fell asleep and cried in a way I did not let her see. Meanwhile, Daniel had started dating a woman named Stephanie Garza. The Garzas are not a famous family in Garland. They are a comfortable one, which is a different and sometimes more powerful thing. Stephanie's father owns 3 car dealerships. She drives a new model every 2 years. She and Daniel had been together for about 14 months when he proposed, which he did at a rooftop bar in Dallas with what I later found out was a ring purchased at a significant discount through a connection Stephanie's father had. Daniel posted the video on Facebook within the hour. My mother commented a string of heart emojis. My father said, "That's my son." The engagement changed the temperature. Suddenly, my parents spoke about the family in a particular register. I recognized from weddings I'd attended as a child, where everyone performed happiness for the photographs. My mother started referring to herself and my father as the Callaways, as in, the Callaways are hosting the rehearsal dinner. The Callaways have always been close-knit. The Callaways are so excited to welcome Stephanie. This version of the Callaways had a daughter who was a nurse, which was nice, she supposed. But the son was marrying into the Garza family. That was the headline. I met Stephanie properly at a cookout at my parents' house that August. She was perfectly pleasant, organized, attentive, the kind of woman who brings a homemade appetizer to a casual cookout and somehow makes it seem effortless rather than pointed. Her parents came. Her father, Ed Garza, shook my father's hand for a long time and called him Bobby, which no one had called my father since high school. My mother wore the earrings she saved for church. I was in the kitchen refilling the ice bowl when Stephanie's mother came in and asked if I needed help. We talked for a few minutes. She asked what I did. I said I was a nurse. She said, "That's such important work," and she meant it. The way people mean it when they say it to nurses genuine. but with the particular note of someone who is glad someone else does it. Edgarza found me later by the back fence. He was holding a glass of iced tea and watching the yard with the relaxed authority of a man used to assessing property. He asked about my work schedule, about Emma, about whether I had any plans to go back for my nurse practitioner license. I said I'd been considering it. He nodded, like this was the right answer. "Your brother's a lucky guy," he said. Having someone steady in his corner, I thanked him. I drove home later and thought about the word steady. How it was the right word. How it was also a word that could be used to mean invisible. 8 weeks before the wedding, my mother called. Her voice was honey this time. The particular register she used before a request that she'd been rehearsing. "There's a family meeting," she said. "Sunday, 2 o'clock. Your father wants us all in the same room before the wedding, just to get everything sorted out." She said sorted out the way people say it when they mean something specific that they are not saying. My stomach dropped and I could not have explained why. A family meeting on a Sunday, 2 months before your brother's wedding, to discuss things that need sorting out. That sentence had a shape I recognized. I'd taken care of enough patients over enough years to know that when people use that much careful language, they are usually delivering news they have already decided on. I called my friend Becca, who has been my best friend since nursing school and who has, in her words, a finely tuned nonsense detector. She is direct the way that people are direct when they've spent years working in emergency triage and no longer have patience for performance. She said, "A family meeting right before the wedding? To sort things out?" I said, "That's what she said." Becca was quiet for 2 seconds, which for Becca is a long time. Then she said, "Bring receipts." She meant it as a figure of speech. But she knows me. She knows I actually have receipts. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table at 11:30 while Emma slept down the hall, her nightlight making a pale stripe under her door. I opened the spreadsheet. 4 years of transfers. $14,400 in year 1. $16,200 in year 2. $18,600 in year 3, because my father's prescriptions changed twice and the property tax bill went up. $11,800 so far in year 4. I ran the total twice. $61,000. Give or take 300 in cash transfers. I hadn't logged in the early months before I started being precise. $61,000. Emma's college fund. The nurse practitioner program I keep saying I'll apply to. The car with the slow oil leak that I haven't fixed in 8 months. The birthday party. The dentist. I set the phone down and looked at the ceiling. Then I opened Facebook. Daniel's profile is public. He posts frequently. I scrolled back 18 months, which took a while, because Daniel posts frequently. San Antonio Festival. 47 photos. A weekend trip to New Orleans with Stephanie. 32 photos. A Rangers game with Ed Garza, front row seats. A photo of a new TV mounted on the wall of my parents' living room, a room I had helped keep the power on in, captioned, "Finally upgraded the setup, 48 likes." My father had commented, "That's my boy." I screenshotted the relevant ones. Then I opened my email, exported the spreadsheet, and printed 22 pages at the Walgreens 2 blocks away, midnight self-service, me and the machine and the fluorescent light. On the drive home, I stopped for a manila envelope at the all-night pharmacy on the corner. I sealed it in my car in the parking lot before I went inside. Sunday, 1:53 in the afternoon. My parents' house. The driveway had 3 cars, my father's truck, Daniel's Jeep, and a silver sedan I didn't recognize that turned out to belong to a man named Warren Cutler, who was introduced to me as a family attorney and who was sitting at the dining room table with a legal pad and a leather portfolio when I walked in carrying the casserole dish. A family attorney. My mother took the casserole dish and set it on the counter without looking at me. My father straightened in his chair. Daniel sat with his arms folded, Stephanie beside him, her expression careful, the way people look when they have been briefed on something and are trying to seem neutral. Warren Cutler shook my hand and said, "Claire, thank you for coming," as if I had been summoned and he was grateful for my compliance. I sat down across from my brother. My father cleared his throat. The same sound I had heard before every announcement that rearranged my life without my input. My mother pressed her hands flat on the table, the gesture she used when she wanted to appear reasonable. Warren Cutler opened his portfolio. "Your parents have asked me to walk through some updates to their estate planning," he said. "Given the upcoming wedding and some changes in circumstances, they want to make sure everyone is aligned." He said aligned like it was a business meeting. He said aligned like a word that meant the outcome was already decided and this was paperwork. My father spoke. He said that he and my mother had revised their will. He said that given Daniel's new family responsibilities, it made sense to restructure the beneficiary distribution. He said Daniel would receive the house and the primary asset allocation. He said I would receive a modest disbursement, which he named $15,000. He said he hoped I understood. Warren Cutler produced a document. He slid it across the table. He indicated a line near the bottom. He said my signature here would acknowledge that I had been informed and that I had no contest to the revised structure. My father set a pen beside the document. My mother looked at her hands. Her eyes were already pink at the edges. Pre-performance, the way they always were before, she needed something from me. I picked up the document. Read it slowly. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I needed them to wait. There was a second page. It was brief. A waiver of any future claim against the estate. My name, a signature line, a date. And if I don't sign? I asked. My father's jaw tightened in the small way it did when someone asked a question he'd decided was irrelevant. Warren Cutler spoke before he could. "This is simply an acknowledgement, Claire. It avoids any complications during an already busy season for the family." My mother's hand moved toward mine across the table. "Sweetheart," she said, "you have your career. You have your own life. Daniel has the wedding, the new family. He needs a foundation. You understand." "That's not an answer," I said. Daniel unfolded his arms. "Claire, don't make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at my brother, 31 years old, tan from the San Antonio trip, wearing a shirt I suspected was new, living in our parents' house without contributing to the mortgage that I had been helping to cover for 4 years. "What happens if I don't sign?" I asked again. My father leaned forward. "We'll have to be honest with Ryan about your situation," he said. "About the instability, about the hours you work, about some of the choices you've made." He let the sentence sit there. And there it was. Custody. Ryan had never threatened to pursue additional custody. But his mother, a woman named Linda Marsh, had an opinion about single mothers and working night shifts and apartments above the 3rd floor that she shared regularly and at volume. If my parents called Linda, if they handed Linda stories, contexts, embellishments shaped into weapons, Linda had money for a lawyer. Ryan's current equanimity about our arrangement was not guaranteed to survive a campaign. My mother leaned in close. Her perfume, something floral she'd worn my entire life, filled the space between us. "Think about Emma," she said softly. "You don't want this to affect Emma." She said my daughter's name the way you'd set a chess piece down. Decisive. Final. As if the game were already over. Something inside me did not snap. I want to be clear about that. Snapping is dramatic, and this room had enough of that already. What happened was quieter. The part of me that had spent 4 years believing things might even out, might be acknowledged, might become fair, that part finished its sentence and went quiet for good, like a machine powering down. Stephanie touched Daniel's arm. Her expression was the careful one from the briefing, but underneath it I saw something shift. Her eyes moved to the document, then to me, then to Warren Cutler, then back to Daniel with a different quality than before. Daniel looked at his phone, smiled, small and certain. "She's always been like this," he said to Warren Cutler, to Stephanie, to anyone in the room who was listening. "She makes things about herself. This is actually why we had to do this now. Before the wedding, before she could complicate things." My mother added, "Warren, I want you to understand the full picture. Claire has had struggles. The divorce, the irregular hours, the arrangement with Emma." Warren Cutler's pen slowed on his legal pad. I kept my hands flat on the table. My bag was on the floor beside my chair. I had put the manila envelope in the outer pocket, easy access. The way I keep the crash cart supplies organized, everything, where your hands can find it without looking. I looked at my mother, 61 years old, pearl earrings, hands that had braided my hair every Sunday before church for the first 12 years of my life. Hands that had texted me at 1 in the morning, Walmart wouldn't cash the check. Hands that had written, "You're the only one I can trust to keep this between us," using my daughter's name to close a real estate transaction. I breathed in, breathed out. Then I reached into my bag. My father watched my hand. He watched it the way patients watch an IV line being placed, uncertain what comes next. I set the manila envelope on the table beside their document. Warren Cutler looked at it. "What is this?" he asked. I peeled back the flap, the way I open a chart at the beginning of a shift. "Efficient, no performance." I said, 4 years of records. I pulled out the stack, 22 printed pages, white paper, small font, very clean. The spreadsheet at the top, exported from my phone's notes app, each transaction dated, the amount, and in the third column, the reason. Property tax, electric bill, car insurance, dad's prescription, changed dosage, water heater replacement, AC unit, groceries, March, groceries, November. The word groceries appeared 17 times, total at the bottom. I had circled it in red, not aggressively, just clearly. $61,000. I held the first page up, not high, just level, the way you hold a chart when you're explaining a reading to a family member. Steady. Warren Cutler leaned forward. He was an estate attorney. He understood numbers. He read the page the way accountants read things from the top, deliberately, without expression, which is its own expression. Stephanie sat very still. Her hand was no longer on Daniel's arm. $61,000, I said. Transferred from my account to my parents over 47 months. Not a loan. There was no paperwork. There was no interest rate. There was no plan to repay it, because we never discussed repayment. It was money I sent because I was asked, and because I believed it was what families did. My father opened his mouth. My mother's hand went to her pearls. I placed the first page beside their document on the table, side by side. The estate revision on the left, the math on the right. Should I keep going? I asked. Because there are 21 more pages. Nobody said no. Nobody said anything. I pulled out the second section. Printed screenshots. Each one with the timestamp visible at the top. My mother's contact name. The message preview. I read the first one aloud. Mom, September 14th. Sent at 12:48 a.m. Claire, the property tax is due Friday. Your father doesn't know I'm texting. We're about 3,000 short. I wouldn't ask, but we have no options. Don't mention it to Daniel. You know how he gets. My father turned to my mother. His voice was quiet. You contacted her at 12:48 in the morning? My mother's eyes filled. Real ones this time, not the performance kind. Gerald, I was. I kept reading. October 22nd, 11:17 p. Can you move any money before midnight? The electric will disconnect at 8. I know it's late. I know you have work. You're stronger than you think, sweetheart. February 8th, 1:53 a.m. Dad had a bad night. His medication copay went up. We're 200 short this month. I didn't tell Daniel because he's been stressed with the job. Warren Cutler had stopped writing. I turned the pages sideways so Stephanie could see the timestamps. Sender. My mother said my name. Just Claire. Barely audible. I removed the third section. 5 pages. Color printouts. Daniel's Facebook posts from the past 18 months. Selected. The San Antonio Festival. The New Orleans trip. The front row Ranger seats with Ed Garza. The television. Newly mounted in the living room of the house where my parents lived. The house I had helped pay for. The house we were currently discussing the inheritance of. The caption. Finally upgraded the setup. I placed them beside the bank records. 3 columns now. The estate document on the left. My $61,000 on the right. And in the middle, documentation of what my brother had been doing with his months and his options while I was covering the electric bill at midnight. I did not make commentary. The documents made commentary. Stephanie was looking at Daniel. Not angry, Not yet. The specific look of a person who has been given information and is in the process of recalibrating. Daniel's voice came out smaller than usual. She's exaggerating. I helped when I could. Warren Cutler looked at him, over his legal pad, over his reading glasses. He looked at Daniel the way estate attorneys look at people when they have just been presented with documentation that complicates a proceeding. He said, "And what documentation of your contributions do you have?" Daniel looked at Stephanie. She did not look back at him. My father was staring at the table. His face had done something I had not seen it do before. Not anger, not argument. A smaller thing. Recognition, maybe. The look of a man who has been holding one version of a story for 4 years and has just been placed in the same room as a different version. $61,000, my mother said. Barely a whisper. From a nurse's salary, I said. While raising Emma alone. While driving a car with a slow oil leak I couldn't afford to fix. While Emma had rice and beans for dinner 4 times a week because the money I could have spent on groceries was keeping the lights on here. My father pressed his hands to his face. A gesture I had never seen from him before. Warren Cutler closed his portfolio. He did it carefully, the way you close something when you have decided the meeting is over. He said, "I think it would be best if the family took some time before proceeding." Nobody argued with him. He began gathering his things. Briefly, professionally. He looked at me once before he stood. Just once. A nod, slight. The kind you give someone who told the truth in a room where that was the harder choice. Then he excused himself, shook my father's hand without warmth, and let himself out through the front door. The sound of his car starting was the loudest sound in the house. Stephanie stood. She didn't slam her chair. She stood the way people stand when they have made a decision, and the only question left is logistics. She said, "Daniel, I need some air." She walked to the back door, opened it, stepped onto the porch, and closed it behind her without force. Daniel followed 30 seconds later. I heard them on the porch, her voice low and even, his rising once and then going quiet. My parents and I sat in the room with their document and my math and the casserole dish on the counter that no one had opened. My father spoke first. His voice sounded like a room with the furniture rearranged in the dark. He said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at him. My father, 61 years old, a man who had introduced me at family gatherings as the responsible one, with a particular tone that made it sound like a consolation prize. I said, "Because you asked me not to. You asked me not to tell Daniel. You said you didn't want anyone worried. And I kept your secret for 4 years, and this is the room I kept it for." My mother was crying quietly. The mascara she'd put on for the attorney was leaving thin lines down her face. She said, "We love you, Claire." "I know you do," I said. "And I love you." "That's not actually the question. The question is whether you've seen me. And I don't think you have. Not clearly. Not in a long time." I stood. I stacked my 22 pages and tapped the edges even on the table. I slid them back into the envelope. "I am not signing your document," I said. "Not today. Not the way it's written. If you want to revisit this in a fair and honest way, with all the information on the table, I'm willing to have that conversation. But I'm done being the one who keeps the lights on and gets left off the paperwork." My father said, "You ruined the meeting." I looked at him. I said, "I answered your questions, Dad. The ones you would have had eventually." I picked up my bag. I walked to the counter. I took the casserole dish back. Nobody stopped me. The walk from the dining room to the front door was maybe 20 feet. It felt longer in the particular way that honest rooms feel larger than they are. I passed the living room. The new television on the wall, recently upgraded. The shelf with Daniel's trophies. My nursing graduation photo on the piano, still slightly crooked. I straightened it on my way out. 2 seconds. I just leveled it. I don't know why. I just did. I pushed through the front door. October in Denton is warm and particular, full of that dry Texas heat that holds on past what the calendar says is reasonable. Pecans on the sidewalk. A neighbor's sprinkler ticking somewhere down the block. I made it to my car. Sat down. Closed the door. Gripped the steering wheel. I did not cry right away. I sat for about 90 seconds, doing the thing I do after a hard shift. The breathing exercise, the hospital chaplain taught me 5 years ago, that I use more than I've ever admitted. 4 counts in. Hold 4. Out. 4. Repeat until the room inside your chest gets larger. Then I cried. Not the kind they had wanted to provoke in that dining room. Not the performance kind. The manageable kind. These were the other ones. The kind that come after you've been carrying something heavy for a long time and suddenly it's on the table instead of on your back. Equal parts grief and something that felt, surprisingly, like oxygen. I called Becca from the driveway. She answered before the second ring. That bad? She said. I told her everything in about 4 minutes. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she said, "You kept 22 pages of records over 4 years." I said yes. She said, "Claire, you absolute nurse." I laughed. First time in 3 days. It came out unsteady, but it came out. I drove to pick up Emma from Becca's youngest daughter's birthday party, which Emma had attended in the leopard print dress she had selected herself and been wearing since 7:30 that morning. She came running out of the backyard gate with frosting on her sleeve, and what appeared to be a balloon animal shaped vaguely like a horse. She hit my knees and said, "Mom, Kelsey has a trampoline in her yard." She said it the way people announce findings that will change everything. I held on to her longer than I usually do. She let me, which meant she was tired enough to allow it. Becca came to the gate. She looked at my face. She said, "You did the right thing. You can't tell, because you're not apologizing for anything. That's new." She wasn't wrong. I buckled Emma into her car seat. She was asleep before we reached the first light. The balloon horse had deflated to something unrecognizable. She was still holding it. I checked the rearview mirror. No one following. I checked my phone at the next red light. Nothing from my father. Nothing from my mother. One text from Danielle that said, "You really couldn't just let this one thing go." I put the phone in the cup holder face down. That sentence could wait. Some responses don't deserve the immediacy you've spent years giving them. I drove home in the quiet, and the quiet was mine. Monday morning. Emma ate cereal and drew a whale shark on a paper towel because we were out of printer paper. I poured coffee and sat across from her and opened my phone to the spreadsheet one more time. Not to add to it, just to look at it. 47 months of a story I had been telling only to myself. First thing I did, I called a family law attorney whose name I had gotten from a colleague at the hospital. Her name was Diane. She was matter-of-fact in the way I appreciate. I explained what had happened, including the mention of my fitness as a parent, including the custody angle. She said, "Do you have the statements they made documented?" I said my brother recorded the meeting on his phone and got those statements on it. She said, "Keep that. If it escalates, we'll be in a strong position." She said, "Position the way I say stable, clinically, as a fact." Second thing, I forwarded the spreadsheet to my own email. 3 copies. 1 to cloud storage. 1 to Becca. A printed copy in the locked file box in my closet where I keep Emma's birth certificate and my nursing license. Third, I texted my mother. 1 message. "I love you. I am not going to disappear. But I will not be treated as an afterthought and a resource at the same time. When you're ready to have an honest conversation, I'm here. Do not contact Ryan or his mother. If that happens, the documentation becomes a formal matter." I set the phone down. Emma looked up. "Was that Grandma?" "Yeah, baby. Is she okay?" "She's thinking about some things." Emma considered this. "She has the whale shark," she said, pointing to her drawing. "He eats plankton. He doesn't have to be mean because he's already the biggest one." I looked at my daughter for a moment. Something about that sentence. "That's right," I said. "He doesn't." I want to step outside the story for a second. Not as Claire in that house. As Claire, here, talking to you. After I sent that text, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Emma went to school. The apartment was quiet. I have spent years in quiet apartments doing math I didn't want to do, covering gaps I didn't create, protecting people who did not think to protect me in return. Here's what I keep coming back to, and I want your honest opinion. Do you think people like my parents always knew, somewhere, what they were doing? Or do I think they had genuinely built a story where Daniel needed more and I was fine because I was capable? Because capable is a word that has been used on me my whole life, and it took me until I was 34 to understand that capable is also sometimes how people justify leaving you to figure it out. Tell me what you think in the comments. I read every one. It matters more than I usually say. Here's what happened in the weeks after. Garland is not enormous. It is large enough to feel anonymous and small enough for things to travel. I did not call anyone. I did not post anything. But Warren Cutler had been at that table, and Stephanie Garza had been on that back porch. Within 2 weeks, Stephanie's mother called my mother. I know because my mother mentioned it in a voicemail she left me later, the first one without the performing tone. She said, "Barbara called me. She was not unkind, but she asked questions I didn't know how to answer." The Garza family is not one that puts their name on things lightly. Ed Garza had shaken my father's hand and called him Bobby. He had also watched a business deal for 23 years. When Stephanie told him what had been on that table, the numbers, the midnight texts, the years of transfers, he listened the way he listened to quarterly reports. Quietly, fully, without interrupting. Stephanie didn't call off the engagement immediately. She gave Daniel 2 weeks to have a different answer than the one he'd had at the table. She asked him one question, which she repeated to me much later. "How much of your own money did you send your parents, Daniel?" "In 4 years, total." Daniel tried 3 different answers. None of them added up. Because there was no number. There was no amount. There was only the absence of a number, which is its own kind of answer. 6 weeks before the wedding, Stephanie returned the ring. No announcement. No social media. A quiet conversation, and then it was over. She texted me 3 days later. One message. "I'm sorry it took a dinner table for me to see the whole picture. I hope Emma knows how hard you work for her." I wrote back, "She will." My parents faced October, without the transfer I had sent every first of the month for 4 years. I know my father's prescription cost went up again. I know the property tax notice came. I know because my mother's voicemails changed. The first 2 were still performing, still the honey register, still the implication that things could be arranged if I would just be reasonable. The third one, left on a Tuesday night at 9 o'clock, was different. It was quiet and tired and honest in the way that people are honest when they have stopped rehearsing. She said, "Claire, I've been sitting here thinking about what you said. About seeing you. About not seeing you." She stopped. I could hear the kitchen in the background, the refrigerator hum I had known since childhood. She said, "I think your father and I told ourselves a story where you were fine because you always handled things. And I don't know when we stopped asking if you were fine or just asking you to handle things." She stopped again. "I don't know if that's an apology. I don't know if I'm saying this right, but I wanted you to know I've been thinking about it." 38 seconds. I saved that voicemail, not because it fixed anything. Not because it was enough, but because it was the first time in 4 years that someone in that house said something true to me without needing anything back. My father called on a Thursday. He said, "I'm not going to insult you by pretending the timing isn't about the bill." He said, "We got the property tax notice." He said, "I know." Then he was quiet. Then he said, "I looked at what you sent us over 4 years. I added it myself. I'm not going to tell you what I think about that because the right word hasn't come to me yet. But I looked at it. That's not an apology," I said. "I know," he said. "When you have the right word," I said, "call me. I'll answer." He said okay. I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a minute with my hands on the counter. Emma was in her room recording a nature documentary on her tablet about the food chain poster. I could hear her narrating in the specific authoritative voice she used. "The anglerfish," she said gravely, "is not what she seems." 3 months after that Sunday meeting, I still live in Denton, still work the telemetry floor, still drive the car with the slow oil leak, though I finally scheduled the repair for next week with the $400 that no longer leaves my account on the first of the month. Emma's college savings account is open. The starting balance is not impressive. It exists. That's the thing. I applied to the nurse practitioner program at UNT. The application is in. I don't know yet if I'll get in. but the application exists, and that is a thing I could not have done 2 years ago because I did not have the study hours, the exam fees, or the particular kind of forward-looking energy that comes when you stop spending your future covering someone else's present. Becca noticed something. She said it over coffee on a Saturday, watching Emma and her twins argue over a board game in the other room. She said, "You look different." I said, "I haven't slept more than usual." She said, "It's not sleep. It's like you stopped waiting for something." She was right. I had spent 4 years half listening for the next phone call, the next midnight text, the next number I'd need to move around. That frequency has gone quiet. The absence of it feels like being able to hear clearly for the first time. I'm going to talk to you directly now. Not as Claire in that house, just as Claire. I don't want you to leave this story hating my parents. They're not villains from a story. They're two people who found a way to need one child that they never found a way to acknowledge, and they justified it the way most people justify things a little at a time, with good intentions somewhere in the early part and convenience the rest of the way. My brother is not cruel. He is someone who has been told his whole life that the gap between what he has and what he's earned is someone else's problem to manage. These things are hard to unlearn. Some people do not unlearn them, but somewhere out there, someone listening is the Claire in their family. The capable one. The one who handles things. The one who gets the midnight texts and sends the money and shows up with the casserole dish and does not get put on the paperwork. The one who is fine because no one ever stopped long enough to check. If that's you, I want you to hear something. You are allowed to put the casserole dish back in your car. You are allowed to say I love you and also no. Those two things share a sentence. They are not enemies. You are allowed to have kept records not because you are building a case, but because you are a person who documents things, who pays attention, who takes care of things precisely because someone has to. That's not strategy. That's character. And character, it turns out, is its own kind of evidence. Boundaries are not punishment. Boundaries are not selfishness. Boundaries are not proof that you don't love the people you're drawing them around. Boundaries are you saying, I love you, and I'm going to stop burning so you stay warm, because neither of us is served by the arrangement we've been in. I know the guilt is physical. I know it sits in your chest. I know that table, the document, the pen, the perfume of someone you've loved your entire life, using your child's name to close a deal. I know what that room feels like from the inside. I also know what the other side feels like. It feels like a child asleep in the back seat, a deflated balloon horse in her hand, and the phone finally silent. Emma drew a picture last week. 2 people, a whale shark in the corner because of course there's a whale shark. She said, "That's us, our family." I looked at it for a long time. "Yeah," I said, "that's exactly right. That's where I'll leave it. If this story landed somewhere true for you, if you've been the steady one while everyone else took credit for steady, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I have a story in the description that I think will hit just as close. And if you've had your own envelope moment, the day you stopped folding, the day you brought your own paperwork, the day you finally said, I know what this cost, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. Your stories reach me in ways I don't always have the words for. Thank you for staying to the end. I'll see you in the next one.